Okay. So, hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Katie Darr. I serve on the U.S. Biosphere Network's Communications Committee, and I also coordinate the Champlain Adirondack Biosphere Network. Thank you for joining us for the first Biosphere Bites talk of 2025. Again, these are 30-minute talks that provide a dedicated space to support regular exchange and learning across our national and international networks. All Biosphere Bites talks are recorded and will be posted on the U.S. Biosphere Network's YouTube page. A little different this year, we'll be holding our Biosphere Bites talks monthly instead of bi-weekly, so we'll hope to see you the fourth Wednesday of the month moving forward, with some exceptions for holidays in there. And we're working on filling out our 2025 calendar, so if there's something that you'd like to bring to this space and share with the US Biosphere Network and our international partners, please let me know and we'd be happy to get you on the schedule. Our usual Zoom housekeeping: please keep yourself on mute if you're not presenting or asking a question during the Q&A. Feel free to put questions in the chat as they arise, and I'd also welcome folks to go ahead and put their introductions in the chat and what biosphere regions you might be joining from, if that's applicable to you today. Today we are joined by Kristyn Ferguson, who's the Managing Director at the Ontario Conservation Accelerator, and she will be speaking to us about the Ontario Conservation Accelerator as an innovative model for conservation in Canada. I know the US Biosphere Network team is especially excited to learn more about that and see what we can apply in our own biosphere regions here. Kristyn was the architect of the Ontario Large Landscapes program at the Nature Conservancy of Canada, which is one of the most successful and innovative conservation programs in the organization's history. She led the conservation of the Boreal Wildlands, the largest private conservation project in Canada's history. And in addition to directing that program for 4 years, over her 16-year career with NCC, Kristyn served as program director in various geographies and acting as senior director of conservation. Kristyn has a bachelor's degree in environmental biology and a master's in environmental studies, and she has represented conservation interests across numerous forums related to industry interests, large-scale landscape planning, Indigenous land symposiums, and she believes that conservation work works best when everyone plays a role. And she has a passion for solving complicated problems, but on her days off, you might find her hiking and cycling entire trail systems for fun. So Kristyn, thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to hear it from you, and I'll pass it over to you to present.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks for that awesome intro, Katie. It was a lot to get through. So thanks so much for having me here today. Thanks for everyone who took a bit of time over their lunch hour or otherwise, if you're not in the Eastern time zone, to come out and learn a little bit about conservation up here in Ontario in Canada. So Ontario is a bit of a unique situation. Our province contains 40% of the population of Canada, a significant concentration of the wealth in this country, a whole bunch of the biodiversity. Actually, some of the southern portions of Ontario are on par with the latitudes in Northern California. So we've got some of the really good species at risk down here. Coupled with all of that, 87% of the province is in public lands, so government held lands, leaving only 13% in crown land. So it's a really unique situation for conservation. It's a landscape that demands a lot, can deliver a lot, and we're just really excited to be a part of that. So I'm excited to share with you today a bit about our organization, the Ontario Conservation Accelerator, and some of the approaches we're taking. And I'm guessing a lot of them are going to sound pretty familiar to some of the folks on this call, but maybe there'll be some ideas in here that spark a little something in you guys. And I realize nowhere in this presentation is my email address, but I would love to have follow-up conversations with anyone who would like to, so do feel free to follow up with Katie to get in touch with me. So just painting a bit of a background, and again, a lot of this won't be a surprise to anyone to hear that this is the moment for conservation in Ontario, in Canada, here in North America, and across the world. The societal demand for access to nature is greater than ever, particularly after the COVID-19 pandemic. We all saw it. Now governments are responding by increasing their focus on green space and recreation and getting people into those natural areas, but certainly looking for aligned partners to help them deliver on this. We all know about the big generational transfer of wealth, money, land, moving hands from baby boomers to the next generation down. And in situations where perhaps the kids have moved away and may not be able to take on the land, a lot of these folks have turned to their local or regional land trusts or conservation organizations looking for what is the solution for their land. And some of our local land trusts have reported back feeling almost overwhelmed by those opportunities, that they're coming at such a pace and scale now. So the need is certainly there. There is, at the same time, this great growth in our land trust and nonprofit sector. We're seeing it here in Ontario, almost an inflection point where several of our local land trusts are at the point from being able to step up from those sort of grassroots volunteer-led organizations to hiring staff, to chasing down opportunities, to being able to say yes to everything showing up in the pipeline. And so we want to be there to support that transition. With threats of biodiversity loss and climate change at historically high levels, there just is simply this perfect storm for conservation, a convergence of need and opportunity, and we've got to capitalize on it. So since our organization launched, which was actually just this year in 2024, we've had a lot of questions about why another conservation organization. We know there are so many incredible existing organizations working out there, and we're so excited to be a partner to so many of them. But as I mentioned, there's that overwhelm of there is almost too much to do, too much conservation opportunity, and the time is now to make sure that we're not turning away any opportunities. At the same time, conservation, it's almost at a point where we can think about a bit of an evolution in it. For 40, 50, 60 years, conservation's been being done in a couple of certain ways, which are working, and those traditional tools are at the heart of conservation still. But we need to be thinking about innovative ways to ramp things up, leverage the expertise of people who've been in the field for a while, get rid of silos, start sharing all our resources, and engaging with a wider variety of partners who have an interest in land. So it's sort of broadening the aperture to include potentially forestry, mining, other land uses, and really trying to find those areas of overlap. So our group, OCA, we haven't defined a specific set of goals, except for one goal: to help the acceleration of conservation in Ontario, whatever that might look like. We're thrilled that we have 47 active projects in our pipeline. About a third are being led by us, 2/3 being led by our amazing partners, and then an additional 40 projects that are sort of a mix of hopes and dreams, and follow up on that one in 6 months, and altogether close to 100 projects that could come to light in the coming months or year. Some of the areas we're focusing on, which has been really exciting, is first convening public and private partnerships. So bringing together governments, local land trusts, other local public interest groups, with the goal of bringing more public land into conservation and doing complementary private land conservation or other types of work around those areas to really have the maximum impact on the landscape. Those projects have tended to focus a lot on increasing access to nature for all people. OCA is also leading direct conservation efforts in areas where there are gaps and there aren't regional or local land trusts that already exist, but there are great opportunities for conservation. So that's a place where we have set ourselves up so we can function as a land trust when needed, when helpful, and may work with local stewardship partners or local governments to figure out the best path forward for those lands. But sometimes the best path forward starts with getting them into conservation right away. And supporting our partners is a huge part of our work. So that's everyone from Indigenous communities to industry, conservation groups, government at all levels. We really want to help anyone and everyone who cares about land realize their ambitious visions for conservation in the areas that they live in and work in. And we're really trying to use an abundance mindset when sharing resources and expertise, recognizing that it's that rising tide that lifts all boats and growing the pie for everybody. And all of these analogies, they're there for a reason. It just makes sense to share in this work that we know is what the world needs right now. Some of OCA's goals are to, as I mentioned, protect as much land and water in Ontario as possible, doing it as effectively, efficiently, and collaboratively as we can. We have sort of this exciting stretch goal of a nature reserve for every community, and we'd love to make tangible progress towards that every year, because we all can think about those nature spots in our own backyards that meant so much to all of us growing up and maybe sparked some of our interest in this. And it's time to make sure that every community, especially in areas that are growing quickly, have that as well. We're really jazzed about using all the conservation tools in the toolbox. When I was down at the Land Trust Alliance rally in Rhode Island this fall, I kept mentioning the OECM tool. So that's an acronym, OECM, Other Effective Conservation Measures, to some of my new American Land Trust friends who are all going, what is that? So it might be something we're doing a bit more of in Canada. It's a sort of new international tool that recognizes lands that aren't intended to be conservation, but are having great conservation outcomes. So you might picture a set-aside area in a working forest, a buffer land around a military base. Conservation has a lot of different faces. So using new tools like the OECM to recognize these can help paint a more sort of holistic picture across the landscape and help us determine where we need to zero in our efforts and really focus those limited resources. We're excited about all of the tools and also building new ones and rolling them out at scale when possible, especially if we find those ones that work quite efficiently or effectively. Optimistically, we think we can drive tens of millions of dollars into conservation projects across Ontario that protect tens to hundreds of thousands of hectares over the coming years. So some lofty goals. The way we want to do this is mainly through supporting our partners, as I've mentioned, deploying our team's unique skills. And collectively, the four of us have about 60 years of experience in the conservation space in areas such as senior government relations. So kind of working right with the highest levels of government to really truly hear what they're looking for, match those with projects we're hearing about on the ground. We can support conservation planning and mapping and have a wizard on our team who's capable of doing all of that. We have a couple of staff who really enjoy negotiating land deals, me being one of them. So always happy to help kind of support groups who might be out chasing down their first acquisition when they've only ever done land donations, for example. We also have a fundraising wizard, part 1 and 2 on our team. And they're great at sort of, again, connecting the right funders to the right projects and giving conservation organizations and other groups looking to do conservation advice on the best ways to go about fundraising to bring those much needed dollars into conservation space. We see ourselves as moving fluidly between the lead role and the support role, depending on what any given geography, project, partner needs, and happy to kind of be nimble in that way. We're thinking through what are some of the key ingredients that has helped OCA in these first few months of our journey. And I think one of them was avoiding limits. So not as applicable to the Biosphere network, but we haven't limited ourselves to a certain geography. It sure would be nice, I think, that some days to be able to focus in on one area, but I also like the ability to kind of be in a lot of places at once and to be where we're needed, filling those gaps. And again, using all the tools in the conservation toolbox and not saying, well, we do this, but we don't do this. Instead, we're happy to explore it all and figure out what's the right match for a project. We're building partnerships with all levels of government across all political parties, and that's been incredibly beneficial. There are always going to be overlaps and places for win-wins with government. And so staying really engaged in those relationships has been key. We really prioritize being nimble and agile. This allows an adaptive response to those fluctuating external market conditions that we just can't control. So when politics change and maybe it's getting quiet before an election and our government and public-private partnerships aren't moving, then it's time to sort of switch over into what are the projects we're driving forward, either ourselves or with our land trust partners, or have that next big conversation with industry. It's kind of the idea of being open to all of these, I picture them as highway lanes, and then driving the car wherever the best conservation opportunity exists at that specific time. And a lot of that is loading as many irons into the fire as possible so we can read the sort of market situation and figure out when it's the right time to pull the right projects out and try and make them happen. We're big into the idea of relentless energy, relentless enthusiasm, relentless helpfulness. And we have a team that really embodies this spirit, and we're trying to have a lot of fun along the way. That's one of our core values. And we really like tackling complex issues head on with this idea that there isn't a problem that can't be solved with the right time, resources, creativity. So those are just a few of the key ingredients we're bringing to the table to try to make this model work. Katie had mentioned some folks may be curious about sort of how the funding model fits for our not-for-profit. So we were officially launched back in September, but these ideas had kind of been coming together for some time from a number of individuals working across the conservation space, seeing the gap in a group that could kind of be nimble enough to jump in and help all across the board. we're very privileged that our operations costs are currently being generously supported by one individual and one foundation donor. Those are based on longstanding relationships and trust we've built and working together over many years. And we've just launched our Accelerator Fund, which was intended to raise kind of this ready to go money, the check that can be signed tomorrow, the funding for urgent projects to bring things along right now. So if we have a partner that can't get board approval to buy that critical piece in their geography, because it's going to take 6 months to get the right approvals in place, we might be there so we can buy it and then hold it for them, transfer it when the time is right. And the Accelerator Fund can also be launched directly into partner projects. We've already had several multi-year major 6- and 7-figure commitments to it, which is really exciting. And this really does allow us to raise money directly for projects, which are the bread and butter of conservation. Those are the easy sell, as we all know. And we get to then act as sort of consultants without the price tag. I've had a lot of people, when I show up, go, what do you charge for this? Absolutely nothing. Just let's get great conservation done together. And we sort of invented a term. I don't know if we invented it. Tell me if anyone else is using it, but almost like a practitioner's foundation, where we do have access to a lot of funders, and there are funds flowing into some of our coffers that we want to be deploying in a strategic way, while at the same time being right there in the trenches doing the work alongside these great conservation organizations. So if you're trying to picture, like, what are these people actually doing? I made a bit of a list of some partnerships and some projects that might help you kind of wrap your head around it. So I'll start with the list of some of our great partnerships. The first and foremost being with the Ontario government. We're really thrilled to be working to establish and expand new provincial parks here in Ontario. Just this week, we are super excited to announce that OCA is going to be leading the Urban Provincial Parks Working Group, which is going to be sort of sourcing these sort of kind of grassroots community projects from urban areas all across Ontario that need to be kind of elevated and protected and conserved and have trails added to them and maintained and that sort of thing. So our executive director, Mike Hendren, is going to be chairing that, and we're just so excited to see what sort of opportunities flow in, which ones we can elevate to provincial parks, and then which ones we can determine, okay, what are the great next steps that we do with them. We've been working a lot with regional land trusts. There's 35 of them here in Ontario. So that's working with board and staff on kind of all aspects of the business, making sure that they've got all the tools they need to be going as fast as possible and having as much fun along the way. So that might be supporting strategic acquisitions with some small amounts of funding, negotiating land deals and providing advice on purchases, supporting their conservation planning and mapping, supporting multi-partner asks and major funding sources. There's a whole breadth of work we're doing, and it's been wonderful getting to work closely with these regional land trust partners who are really the beating heart and soul of conservation in Ontario. We have a lot of emerging industry partnerships with the forest industry, mining industry, developers. In these cases, we're really just open to those initial conversations and figuring out where we may have overlaps and where there may be great win-wins for conservation and for the goals that these groups are trying to achieve. We're working with several large Canadian foundations to help connect their funds to the right projects. Really thrilled about some of the early work we are undertaking with Indigenous land trusts as well as First Nations directly. So whether that's providing support or working directly with the nations themselves, we're looking at where we can develop those partnerships and where we might take them. And then working with a variety of conservation organizations who may have a different focus than us, more on, say, the research side or watershed management, but again, finding those win-wins and overlaps. I'll take you through just a few example projects, and sorry, I had to redact a bunch of this because they're all sort of like confidential announcements that are coming up. So stay tuned. Check out the oca.ca. You'll see more. You'll see more soon. But yeah, the first is working in one of these areas I mentioned that doesn't have an active local land trust, doing some private land acquisition and recognition. Recognition being the use of that tool I mentioned, the OECM, where these landowners are managing their land in such a way that they have great conservation and biodiversity values. But we're also right in there with fee purchases, donations, exploring conservation easement agreements, and again, kind of using the whole breadth of tools in the toolbox. Just came out of a wonderful meeting with the Guelph to Goderich Trail folks this morning. There's an amazing rail trail, a recreational trail that's been converted from an old rail trail to a cycling and hiking trail. And we're looking at how we might regulate the lands that underpin this trail into a linear provincial park, which is really exciting. So kind of bringing in government, grassroots on the ground group who's been stewarding this trail so well and has great ideas for its future. We may look at how we could acquire adjacent pieces to add things like day use areas or camping areas to sort of augment this project. And yeah, that's been a real pleasure and really enjoying that type of work. We have a to be announced recognition project of 10,000 hectares down there. That's 25,000 acres. I still think in acres too. And it's another one of these recognition projects. So it's going to be actually not an OECM. We thought it may screen out that way, but actually it's going to be the first individually owned piece of land counted as a protected area. So on par with a provincial park, conservation reserve, private nature reserve in Ontario. So we just finished that in November and we'll be announcing it this spring. So again, stay tuned. A couple of my colleagues have been working hard on the Charleston Lake Provincial Park expansion. So that's in our Frontenac Biosphere Reserve area. And it is the idea that we're going to double the protected land in and around the park through a series of things, increasing the protections on public lands to regulate them into park, acquiring pieces of land around the park, working closely with the local land trust there, the Thousand Islands Watershed Land Trust, to do that. And we've just been trying to support wherever we can, whether that's land securement, fundraising, government relations, or planning. And so, yeah, another really big one coming through the door at potentially a few thousand acres when it's all said and done. We're supporting an Indigenous land trust who's just kind of getting up and running now, the Minoaki Land Trust, an amazing group governed by 5 Indigenous grandmothers who are actually in the process of putting through their first land donation. And so I was so excited when I had the opportunity to say, I would love to help you figure out all those annoying Western securement processes and put it through a complicated federal tax benefit program. It's my absolute honor to be able to do that. So to provide any of that, the things that I've had the privilege of learning in my career to put forward to this work that is just truly so amazing. Up in Northern Ontario, we're working on exploring the potential for a working forest conservation easement on a large tract of land, possibly up to 30,000 acres. And that's not a tool that's being used very much here in Ontario. I know it's a lot more common in the States, and all the examples of working forest conservation easements I've received are from my great forestry partners down in the States. So thank you. And it's cool learning about how we might make that work and make sure that these places contain sustainable forestry forever, and don't end up subject to development, etc. In Central Ontario, another sort of quiet for the moment project we're working on is the regulation of a new conservation reserve. So this is sort of the vision of a local land trust, the cooperation of the forest company operating on the crown lands, and then the government who owns those public lands, all coming together to identify that there is this particular area that's ecologically significant, not of significant value to the forest company, and would make sense as a new conservation reserve, which is like a park. And that could be 20,000 acres. And so a really exciting one that we're just kind of working our way through the various steps right now. I think I'll leave it there. It's a lot of projects to mention, and yeah, just really, really excited about all of them. So yeah, I just needed to take a moment at the end to acknowledge that this is truly a team sport. I worked on this slide to try and fit all of our funders, supporters, advisors, partners, collaborators, and I ran out of room on this slide. So to anybody who's not here, my sincere thanks for all the support you've shown to the Ontario Conservation Accelerator as we've gotten up and running this year. And just a shout out to my incredible team. So sort of left to right, we've got our executive director, Mike Hendren, Peter Kendall, the chair of the board, who is right there doing the work with us every single day. Jill Murray-Dimmick, our incredible director of development. Luke, our conservation manager, and that's me over there on the right. And so that's it for my presentation today. So I was be very happy to take any questions that anybody might have.
Thanks so much, Kristyn. 1 year of work. That's incredible. So congratulations to you and your team for all of the great work you've already done and what's on the horizon. We do have a question from Kate Potter in the chat. Kate, do you want to ask your question off mute?
Yeah, happy to. And I apologize. I was out in the freezing Ontario cold walking my dog, so I arrived a little bit late. But just wondering kind of what the impetus for starting the Conservation Accelerator was, and if you've been in touch with the Ontario Biosphere regions. I know they work with a lot of local land trusts, and it seems to be land acquisition focused, but there might be an opportunity for some collaboration there.
Yeah, great questions. I was just jotting down Ontario Biosphere Regions. No, we haven't had a direct connection there. So if you'd be able to make that, we would be so happy to kind of explore what might be possible there. Yeah, the impetus for this was just noticing that there were a few gaps in the conservation landscape. It was either groups couldn't work outside of a specific geography, or maybe they were limited in terms of what conservation tools they could use, or maybe that some of the processes in place were meaning that really urgent conservation opportunities couldn't be kind of jumped on and actualized as soon as possible. So it was sort of the vision of a few folks who were noticing these gaps over the span of a couple of years that really just kind of brought it all together in 2024 to say, like, let's make the leap and make this organization reality.
Thank you.
And I have a question, and that is, how do you reach out to known opponents of whatever it is that people are trying to do in conservation and get them to open their thinking to look at maybe they can still be an opponent, but maybe they at the same time can help do part of it? How do you get them going in dialogue?
Question, John. And you know what? Sometimes it takes a lot of time. I remember I kept showing up to this one forestry conference year after year, and they'd always see conservation in my name tag, and they'd be sort of running to the other side of the room. So I think my answer is really just kind of kill them with kindness, but also practicality. So tell me what problems you're having, and let's brainstorm it together. Like in the case of a couple of the forest companies we talked to, there were some issues around the sort of PR side of things, and they wouldn't mind some positive press. And we found win-wins in places like working forest set aside areas that are conservation and should be celebrated and recognized. So it was just sort of pitching those ideas, and sometimes over and over again, and with a lot of patience. And I think one of our forestry partners coined that term, relentless enthusiasm.
I like that.
Thanks.
Yeah, my experience was in a discussion group about biodiversity that included conservationists as well as ranchers. And at one point in the dialogue, the ranchers pointed out, we like to look at birds too. So getting that dialogue going is a way of finding where the common interest is.
Yeah, realizing everyone's a human at the end of the day. We are going to have areas of overlap and shared interest.
Right.
And yeah, seeing where we can find those through a little bit of patience and creativity.
Any other questions in our last 2 minutes together? I have one. So just thinking about, your funding structure and things, it seems like you've been able to benefit from a lot of long-standing pre-existing relationships. Do you have any advice for getting those relationships off the ground, and then how do you maintain them in the midst of all of the many, balls you have in the air with these various projects?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I guess, yeah, I do tend to think about conservation at its heart as being about people and relationships. So even when you get bogged down in the day-to-day grind and paperwork and all of that, put that down and make sure you're picking up the phone to those key partners and keeping them engaged in your work and doing your best to really truly listen to how you can help them deliver on their vision. And I think that goes a long way in building trust. It's just showing up again and again. I guess it's kind of the same answer to the last question. But yeah, really prioritizing relationship building over basically everything, because yeah, that's what I've learned in my couple decades, that's what it all seems to come back to in the end.
Great. Thank you. Anybody else have a final question? or Kristyn, or if anyone from your team has a final comment, we'll make space for that too.
I saw them both here. I thought they might lob me an easy one or a really hard one.
No, you did great. That was fun.
And it's an impressive program you have going. So thank you for sharing it.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Kristyn. This was so wonderful to learn more about, and excited to share this through the US Biosphere Network, and also learn about how you all might collaborate with Canadian biosphere regions in the future. It seems like there's a lot of good overlap there. So thanks everyone for joining us today. Our next Biosphere Bites will be at the end of February. I put a link in the chat where you can stay up to date on future sessions, but we'll let you go for now and have a great day.
Thanks so much.